How you all doing? Thanks, Matt, and thank you for having me here. Like Matt said, I work for the FAA, and I work in a group that what's interesting, I'll go back a little bit of history. Prior to 2017, our interaction with drones was a real FAA and government response in that, no, we don't want drones in the airspace, we can't monitor them, we can't track them, they're very small, air traffic has an issue with them. And having 20 years of air traffic, you understand that if you can't see it, it's a potential problem in the national airspace system. And then a couple of years ago, we were asked to start working with law enforcement and first responders in integrating drones into the airspace. Mainly getting them access to airspace that was previously untouchable or prohibited to them. And a lot of that had to do with other aspects of the government, namely the Flight Standards Group, who monitors all aircraft, and they're usually the people who like to say no to everything. We realized that we were doing a disservice to our users. We were doing a disservice to the American population, and first responders really have been a pioneer, and they've been a test subject for a lot of the inroads that we have made in making things happen. And I'll give you a case in point. When they came out with some of the drone rules a couple of years ago from Congress, they said, okay, if you fly a drone, you have to be below 400 feet, and you can't be within 5 miles of an airport, and blah, 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 blah. And it was very restrictive because they did not want it anywhere near an airport, because now you have to start worrying about drone safety, aircraft safety, and they still had the mindset that manned and unmanned were two completely different beasts, which that thought process has changed. A lot of it now is, if it's in the air, it's an aircraft. It doesn't matter if it's manned or unmanned, and we have to go forward with that. But a couple of years ago, we started working with law enforcement. They were one of our first customers that were coming directly to my group and requesting access to congested airspace. And if you know anything about airspace, they have classes of airspace, class A, B, C, D, G. And we were giving them authorization to fly. And we were coordinating with our air traffic partners. And then we started allowing them to fly at night. So the first time, we gave one of these authorizations for a first responder to fly at night. The next day, my boss gets a call from the head of Flight Standards yelling at him, saying, why are your people giving authorization? They can't do that. And my boss said, yes, they can. And the question was, under whose authority? He said, mine. And I have to go now, and he hung up the phone. And since then, Flight Standards, they pretty much stay away from us because they realize that they can't bully us, and we are going to do what we feel is best in terms of if someone's life is at stake, if someone's property can be compromised, then we are going to do everything we can to get that UAS in the air to quickly assess, to quickly help, and move on. This is the future. So we might as well try to help and figure it out now, and also the lives that are saved. We work with law enforcement at 24/7. They're using drones now when they're doing high-risk search warrants, when they're chasing suspects who are fleeing. And it's saving lives because that drone can follow them, 50 feet above their head and make them usually surrender pretty quickly. Torrance, California, the police department, they're one of the pioneers in the nation of using drones for pretty much everything. And they've sent us videos, and what's fascinating is when they have a drone and they're chasing a suspect. As soon as the suspect sees the drone, they stop and put their hands in the air. In the old days, if it was a helicopter, they wouldn't, helicopter, they're limited, and they would keep running. But they know they can't get away from a drone. And for a lot of them, the drone kind of scares them. You know, they think, okay, this is the future, and maybe this isn't the police department, maybe it's aliens. You don't know what they think, and we don't care as long as they get caught. And then we expanded. When Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, prior to that, there was no large-scale process for drones to get access to the airspace. And we were put into place, and we kind of were told to learn on the fly. They said, we're putting out this flight restriction, we're putting your phone number in there, and you guys are pretty smart. Figure it out as you go along. That was really interesting. I might come back to this one later. And here's some examples of what we do. We work with the DoD, FEMA, all the other partners when there's air missions and search and rescue flights. And years ago, the search and rescue flights were always helicopters. Now a lot of times the drones will go out there first. They'll identify where there's people that are stranded or trapped and they need rescuing, and then the helicopters go out there. We save a lot of money, we save a lot of time, and we save a lot of lives. And core functions of the agency, establishing airspace management, but a lot of this is, I'll say blah, 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 because on your level, a lot of this doesn't matter, because if you're going to be involved in, say, search and rescue, or infrastructure repair, or assessment, these are all periphery items. They're in the background. This is mainly for my group to be worried about and to basically share the information. A lot of times we'll get into some complex situations, and what we like to do is educate the requester of why we might not be able to give a UAS access to that airspace right now. We very rarely will say no. It might be not yet. It might be we need more information. Our goal is to get to yes. And a lot of times I'll do conferences, and I used to start off by saying, hi, my name is Kerry Fleming, and I'm with the government, and I really am here to help. And then somebody told me that, oh, there's other people that say that now. So they stole that from me, if you ever hear that one. They're not here to help. They're here to watch and take notes. And this is an example of UAS, authorization by the FAA to operate in an AS, and then to operate in a TFR. The airspace around the DC area is one of the most highly restrictive in the country at all times. That's a carryover from 9/11, and you have a lot of the interagency security partners that still to this day, they don't like the idea of drones flying here. And so they made the process very cumbersome, that we actually require people to have multiple waivers to fly in and around Washington, D.C. Not my idea. I think that there's a way to make it more streamlined, and we might get there. Things evolve all the time. Things are constantly changing. And some of the people that we've dealt with in the past, the Omaha, Nebraska flooding of last March, in the past, they would have to send out road crews. They would have to send out helicopter crews. Now, they'll send out a crew, and they can go beyond visual line of sight and send a drone to quickly identify any transportation hubs or roads or bridges that have been washed away, or they could be suspect. So you have to quickly assess what type of damage they've had from any type of an event. This was actually in the red. That was the access that we gave to this particular company. I believe it was the railroad, the NSF. And what we gave them was a beyond visual line of sight access to fly in that river area. And whenever we do that, we also have to put up a temporary flight restriction. Because even though a drone has the authority to go up to 400 feet, per the rules, you have to be able to see the drone at all times. Matt went through a hoop jumping process in the Baltimore area recently, where they had to have visual observers out, which if they saw any aircraft in the area, they had to ground their drone, which won't even get into how some of that was ridiculous. So if you have an aircraft at 18,000 feet, I have to ground my drone that's at 200 feet. Doesn't really make sense, does it? But we'll get to that. And in the future, we're already working on that on the inside, saying that doesn't make sense. You can have visual observers. But in this case, no visual observer, because we shut down the airspace. And what that tells manned aircraft is that below 500 feet, there are going to be unmanned aircraft, so it's unsafe to fly in there. And they usually pay attention to things like that. Usually. Every once in a while you get a knucklehead that thinks, oh, I don't agree with that, and I'm going to fly anyway. Last year, Hurricane Michael hit Mexico Beach, Florida, and that caught us all off guard because the ferocity of this hurricane that had quickly developed and slammed into it. And what a lot of people might not know is that there's a DoD installation there called the Konar. Matt, you know what that is. It almost got wiped off the map. We have a facility down there. Our building was demolished. We had to relocate our staff after that. But what was unique about our involvement with the Mexico Beach restoration after the hurricane went through is we put up a temporary flight restriction, but because we wanted to weigh the needs of search and rescue and DoD with their manned aircraft, along with unmanned aircraft that were doing search and rescue, and also utility companies doing quick assessments of the infrastructure, we started the TFR at 500 feet. So the people that are the users that wanted to fly drones for a specific purpose, they could fly unimpeded. They didn't need a specific approval in writing. They didn't need coordination in most of the areas. They could do what they needed to do, and it streamlined the process, and we got a lot of kudos for that. And that might be more of what we do in the future, where we're actually designing airspace restrictions that are useful for both segments, manned and unmanned aircraft. And we'll see how that works out. Some people in the FAA didn't appreciate what we did, but to us, the user did, and that's what matters. Here's an example of Florida Power and Light. They needed to quickly assess all the transmission lines, and a lot of it was inaccessible because of flooding, because of swamps, because there's alligators there that like to eat people, and they don't want to put their people there. And so, we'll design an airspace restriction, a TFR, that goes across multiple miles, multiple areas. There might be some, pockets of population, and it didn't matter because the whole concept was to get them up in the air, quickly assess where the damage was, where there was a transmission line down or damaged, and they can send the crews out there. Florida Power and Light is very happy that they actually can save money not putting out all those crews. Last year, the campfire in Pasadena, California. We put up this TFR. which is a large area, and then the Department of the Interior, flying in association with the U.S. Forest Service, were able to send up their more advanced drones to quickly map the area, and they were identifying hot pockets of fires that they could relate to the incident commander on the ground. And what we really are happy about being part of the process and assisting is that in California, wildfires are a big problem, big nuisance. But we've had a lot of incident commanders who are old school and they don't like the idea of drones. But now that the Forest Service is integrating in with the Department of the Interior, they're seeing how they can quickly identify where they need their apparatus, where they need their resources. And I think going forward in the future, we're going to see where the fires are not as bad as they've been in the past, and there's less loss of life, less loss of people's material belongings and houses and things of that nature and infrastructure. So I've been rambling on because I've been trying to get through some of this quickly and trying to tie it into what we're doing here. So in the past, there was only one way to get a waiver to fly in airspace. You had to go to flight standards. Now there's a different process. So if you want to get a jurisdictional color, which means you have a certain jurisdiction that you're responsible for, you can apply through what's called a drone zone. If you're a first responder and you want a blanket color, you can get those. But now going forward in the future, insurance companies are applying for these blanket colors for large areas where they can send out teams and they can not worry about paperwork for each one. But we also have universities that are doing a lot of testing programs that are being given these blanket colors to operate within the grounds of the university. We understand that the future is based on testing now. So we're trying not to be an obstacle anymore. We're trying to be proactive and start working on different ways of how people can get access, because the future is going to be robotics and drones. And even some of the presentations talking about land-based robotics, this is all going to be interconnected going into the future. And we understand that. And it's difficult because the FAA is kind of like that grandparent you have that always tells you no. You know, they'll give you a piece of candy once in a while, here, have a piece of candy. But everything's no. And the government operates that way because there's fear of the unknown, there's fear of litigation. And the FAA is not really good at, litigation. But my group, one of the things that we want to do is, besides doing our authorizations, doing our part of it, is also to go out and educate and then take some of that information back and use it to make the system more efficient and make it safer for everybody. And I'll give you a case in point. Last year I went to a conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there was a utility company that they were gushing over the fact that they would just send their crews out, and if they were near an airport, they would just call up the airport or call up the air traffic facility and say, hey, we're going to be flying out here, is that okay? And they would say, yeah, that's okay, goodbye, click. No vetting, no paperwork, nothing. And I'm listening to this thinking, okay, they're happy because they don't have to go through any kind of a process. However, we all know that everything's in this country and the world pretty much is run by insurance companies. So afterwards, I talked to some of these utility companies and I asked them the question. I said, if your insurance company knew that your folks were going out there and they were conducting flight operations with drones with nothing more than a verbal authorization from an air traffic facility that may or may not be recorded, how would that make them feel? and almost every one of them said they would probably pull our drone program. They would ground it until we had a better process, because everything's through paperwork, and if you don't have a proper authorization, then that doesn't work. I went back after the conference and I mentioned it to my group and said, we have air traffic facilities that are not getting any of the information. They're just giving verbal authorizations, and that's a problem. So a memo was sent out to all air traffic facilities saying you can't do that anymore because it's not safe. If there was an issue, people are just going to point fingers at each other, and we don't want to do that. In 2018, my group, we did a total of over 700 SGI waivers. And an SGI stands for Special Governmental Interest Waivers. So anything that's in the best interest of the government. It could be local, state, federal. And it's generally first responders, but it also applies to utility companies after disasters. It will apply to insurance companies. And it also applies to the media after some large-scale event. And despite a lot of law enforcement that anytime we say, we're going to allow the media to come and look at this event, they grind their teeth and they start arguing with us because they think that the media is going to misrepresent them, and we have to explain to them that this is America, and we don't restrict the media access because you don't like it or that you may get caught doing something you shouldn't be doing. So, sorry, we don't do that. So they like us when we give them their authorizations, and they don't like us when we tell them that the media is going to take pictures of them. Oh well. 2019. Now this was as of August, that we were already past last year's totals. We are well past it now. We're over 1,000 for the year now, and it's just been increasing every month, every day. We're getting numerous requests just from my shop. And we're not the only ones processing drone access. The FAA instituted an online program called LANCE a couple of years ago. And around every major airport, they put up these grids, and it's basically airspace grids, and they assign numerical values. And I think I have a picture in here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So these grids have numerical values. The red is usually a 0 grid, yellow, it could be 100, 200 feet. And the LANCE program, you could get access electronically without any type of coordination with my group or anybody else in the FAA. If you went online, you went to the LANCE, and you stayed below the grid altitudes as posted for that airport. And if the airport is part of the program. And it does sound complex because it is. Not every airport has LANCE access, which is a problem in itself, but we're getting there. And so you could go in there and you want to fly 200 feet out of limits, and it's a 400 grid, no problem. You get your electronic approval, anything, go. If you need to go above that, then LANCE isn't going to help you out. And if it's an emergency, only my group can help you out. And if you have a valid reason to fly in that area, and I say valid because I've had real estate specialists, managers, brokers, started arguing with me saying that they needed to get a picture and I was interfering with their livelihood. And I can't help them out because we're not here for commercial entities unless it's attached to some kind of disaster. And then the standard response is, okay, you have to go through the other avenue. And the other avenue is called the drone zone. And that's for non-emergency drone access where LANCE doesn't help them out. And people who plan out in advance, well in advance of an event, if there's a a major training activity. You go through the drone zone, and those people are really good, and they'll do what they need to do. And if all else fails, we always say, if the drone zone doesn't help you out, and you're in a bind, and it has any type of governmental interest attached to it, come back to my group. We have a form that we will electronically send out. It gets filled out, gets sent back to us, and we can process a request within a 20-minute turnaround. If it's an emergency situation, a life-saving situation, we'll actually give a verbal and follow up with the paperwork, because we don't want to be in the way of any UAS activity that's actually saving lives or saving property. That's not what we do. Other people in the government do those things, not my group. We really are here to help. And that's the website to get into Lance. And does anybody in here have any familiarity with Lance? Have you ever tried to use Lance before? So there's some geniuses in the government, and I say that very facetiously, that they thought it was a good idea to come up with this electronic program, but then in their infinite wisdom, they decided that they were going to allow multiple commercial vendors to have their own access portals to this system. And none of this was shared with my group, so we're in the dark. And people would call us up and say, hey, I tried to get to Lance and it doesn't work. No one ever shared that information with us. And then I was at the National Hurricane Conference last year, and a representative from one of the vendors actually came up to me, and he wanted to correct something that I had said at my presentation, because I didn't know any better, because the FAA and the government in general, we have a hard time communicating with ourselves. I could be sitting next to somebody and I have no idea what they're doing. And that's not really a good thing. So we're trying to get past that. So I had mentioned in this conference that there was a day when the Lance program went out nationwide, and we started getting phone calls. And we got phone calls. One of them in particular was a member of the media who said that Lance is broken, you need to give me a waiver. Now, I guess I had to take their word for it, but it wasn't an emergency situation, so I actually told them I can't do that. If I give you something and it's not an emergency, it's not tied into a wide-scale media event, and there was someone that we had worked with in the past after the campfires in California and after the hurricanes. And I felt really bad telling them I can't do it, but we had a lot of work to do. And then at this conference, I'm relaying that story, and I am approached and told Lance wasn't out. One particular vendor was out. And I bring that up now because if you ever have to use it and you decide to use a particular vendor because they have a nice logo or someone told you about it, there's other vendors. And I had no idea how this was set up. I figured, well, it's the government. We do things stupid. So we only had, like one phone line into this portal. No. We have multiple vendors. And one vendor went down, but they did not put anything on their website saying that they were out of service because they didn't want to scare off potential customers. And there was no notification to my group that there was a problem at all, which I find mind-boggling because we're supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to help people, and we can't help them if we start having people call us up and yell at us thinking that we did that. Well, anyway, got through that, so we're always learning. We're always trying to get better at what we do. One of the things that came out of that also, in talking to that vendor, they're working on an app that you can have on your phone, that you could be anywhere in the country, and if you need airspace access with your drone, for whatever reason, you can actually go into the app, you can type in this information, and if it's not an emergency, it'll be sent to the drone zone. If it is an emergency, it gets transmitted directly to my group. And I thought that was wonderful. Of course, my boss told me that we can't publicly state that we are for or against any commercial vendor that wants to develop an app, blah, 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 blah. Okay, whatever. All right, you take care of the public relations, and we'll just wait here until it actually is being used for about a year, and nobody tells us. How about that? For us, we would like it because at 2 o'clock in the morning, when we are sleeping, but we're still on call, we'll get phone calls from users that need access. And it's usually, we have a suspect, we're going to put up a search warrant, we know they're going to run, we want the drone to chase them and make them get on their knees and think like, they're being captured by RoboCop or whatever. And there's a lot of questions at 3 in the morning. Like, okay, all right, I got to figure out what airport to call, blah, blah. So anything that could make the process more streamlined, we're in favor of. We, like I said, we don't want to be in the way of the future. We don't want to be an obstacle like other government entities of being an obstacle towards progress. We are all in favor of any program, any drone, any robotics that is going to make the system safer. My group, we're all about safety and security of the airspace, and integrating into that, if it makes it safer, I'm all for it. Getting there, though, there are, like I said, there are tools. We have a beyond visual line of sight waiver that will issue in association with the TFR. Matt probably could have used a TFR when they did their pioneering drone delivery, which did get a lot of people's attention in the government. Generally, from on up high, it was, who signed that? Who thought that was a good idea? How come they didn't tell me? Typical government, hand wringing and teeth gnashing type of reactions. But from that, it sparks the debate, the conversation. All right, that's just now. We're going to get 1,000 more of those requests. How do we handle those? How do we get to yes? Despite the knee-jerk reaction of saying no. We know that we have to get there, and we know that the future means that we are going to see a lot more of this. And with that, I've been yapping enough. So, any questions? I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep. Yes, sir?
Just curious to know, how will this be affected by the introduction of ADS-B?
It's supposed to be integrated. It is the FAA. It is going to be slow. If you've heard of NextGen, NextGen started about 10 years ago. One of the problems with the government is that I've been in the government for 30 years. They may decide tomorrow that they want to put me in charge of drone integration into ADS-B and tell me, okay, you're now going to be the director of that unit. I'm not staying for another 30 years. When I'm going to retire, they'll decide who next is going to go into that position. And like the change of the White House administrations means all new policy and all new programs. Unfortunately, that happens in the government as well. And I've always questioned that if you're going to have a new direction, if you're going to have a new program, and when they announced NextGen, it was going to replace all ground-based navigation lanes. It was going to get us away from TCAS in the cockpit and controllers on the ground. Everything was going to be integrated. It was all going to be satellite-based. And kumbaya, oh my God, we're going to get to nirvana all at the same time. And then a couple of years later, the person in charge of that retired. Someone else came in and said, I don't really agree with that. And so things have constant delays. And then Congress will decide, we're not going to pay for that, or we want to divert money here. So internally, I've always questioned why we don't get somebody who has at least 10 years to go and put them in charge of the program. Because that can be their legacy. And they're not going to go anywhere. So put them in charge of it, get your brightest minds and put them in these positions of power and let them see it through to the end. And you know, who am I? If they listen to me, maybe it would be better. I don't know. I think it's something that time and time again has failed them, because they usually pick someone who is close to retirement, and then that person goes off into private industry, and wow, all of a sudden you find out that they had the contract to work on the next part of the process. Let's not repeat that. They'll yell at me again. Go ahead.
I'm Brad Ryan, USDA, and 35 years ago I used to conduct fly-ins for aerial applicators for spraying. I know a little about the association, but not kept up with it. But I know when drones came along, there's obviously a lot of concerns, aerial applicators and drones in rural areas. Do you know how that's been? I'm not kept up. Do you have any idea how that's been handled in terms of how they manage the airspace in those situations?
Well, a lot of them, if they stay below 400 feet and they have a Part 107 certificate, there's no issues with them. A lot of agriculture is now using drones. We had a situation where the president's winter escape down in Mar-a-Lago, there's a lot of agricultural drone operators down there, and they lobbied the Secret Service. They all got together as a collective and complained that you are costing us money, you are putting us out of business. And they've actually come to a mutual agreement. So they will fly. They have to just coordinate in advance, saying, okay, we're out here, our drone is going to go up to 200 feet, that's going to fly in this area. So we're trying to work with industry to make sure there's the least amount of disruption, and if it's not near an airport, to just follow the rules, just go fly. There's nothing holding you back.
Well, the reason I ask is because aerial applicators, they'll fly under 20 feet above ground level when they're flying. So they get really low. And
it's no issue. I've had people call me up and want a waiver to fly 100 feet in a state park, out in the middle of nowhere. I said, I'm not going to give you a waiver, and you don't have to ever call me again if you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's basically be aware of your surroundings. Just in general, if you could see planes taking off and landing nearby, you probably don't want to fly a drone there, because the pilot in the aircraft is going to see a drone and they're going to freak out, they're going to report it, and then someone's going to come and look for you and say, why were you flying a drone over here? And it gets even worse if it's around DC and it's an official government aircraft taking off or landing. Then you have those other people come and look for you. And you don't want them to come look for you. Good. Anybody else?
I think it's about the time we have. So everybody, again, Kerry, thank you very much for your time today and knowledge.